I bent down and dipped my fingers in the warm, sticky substance that was spread on the ground. The red substance dripped like little drops of rain from the tips of my fingers towards the ground, only to splash as it collided with the dirt-covered earth below me. I smiled. This was the perfect color I needed to complete my painting. I glanced towards the canvas. This beautiful color was exactly what was missing from my masterpiece. I dipped my fingers into the substance again and added the perfect red color to my soon-to-be masterpiece. Most people prefer to use paintbrushes, but I find finger painting to be much more intimate. It's easier to connect to my paintings this way, and besides, I don't mind getting a little messy. In fact, it's necessary. Like I always say, you're not having fun unless you're making a mess of things. But anyways, I've been working on this painting for months now. I wanted it to be perfect, and in order for that to happen, I would have to find the perfect colors to enhance the mood I'm setting for it. I'm going for something sinister, yet beautiful and captivating. Something like her. In fact, that's exactly what it is. Her. She was always so perfect. I paint her every chance I get. The more I paint her, the more I want to be with her and make her part of my painting somehow. I painted her sitting at the coffee shop, at the park where she takes her little sister on the weekends, and sometimes even at her job. She looked stunning in her work clothes, her high heels, short shorts, and button-down ruby top that exposed just enough cleavage to make a man's body ache just to get a hold of them. Which reminds me, also, sometimes I would paint her lying in her bed late at night, wrapped in only her crimson red robe that matched her beautiful red, wavy hair. She would lay there with her nose in a book for hours. It was the perfect opportunity for me to get some paintings done of her. It's like she was posing like that on purpose, like she wanted me to paint her like that. I always loved a nerdy yet kinky kind of girl, and she was exactly that. Not to mention she was smart. So smart she made me feel dumb sometimes, but that's okay. Maybe I am. I was dumb enough to fall for her, dumb enough to spend every waking second of my life watching her, painting her, wanting her. And that's how we ended up here. I just wanted to get a closer look at her. I never meant for this to happen. But what can I say? She closed the curtains on me. She had never done that before. I couldn't stand not seeing her. I needed to see her, paint her, every inch of her flawless body. She knows it wasn't my fault. I didn't mean to break the window, but I promised I'd pay for it anyways, just to make her feel better. But she wouldn't stop screaming. I reached for her, assuring her there was no reason to scream. But instead of trusting me, she grabbed a shard of glass and continued to scream for me to leave or else. So I slapped the shards from her hand onto the floor and then covered her mouth with my hands to silence her screams. And that's when I noticed her face was turning red. I was mesmerized by this. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. Even the whites of her eyes were turning bloodshot red. I don't know how long I was staring at her, but at some point she stopped struggling. I removed my hand from over her mouth and relaxed. I had never been this close to her before. I couldn't contain myself. Her red robe, her red hair, her red complexion, everything about her was beautiful. I eyed her up and removed the robe that was covering the even more fascinating parts of her figure. As I examined the wonderland of her body, I noticed the most beautiful shade of red I had ever seen. Her hand was covered in what looked like red paint, but it was far more beautiful than any paint I had ever laid my eyes on. The color was perfect. I noticed that the color was leaking from a wound on her hand, so I picked up a shard of glass and pressed it to her wrist. I traced it slowly halfway up her arm to where her elbow bends. As I did this, more of that gorgeous scarlet color poured out from her wounded arm and formed a small puddle around her. I marveled in its beauty, for who knows how long. I just wanted to drown in its flawlessness. I dipped my hands into the red substance and smeared it on my face and on my white t-shirt I was wearing under my black hoodie and onto my blue jeans. I stained my clothes and skin to match that flawless crimson red. Once I was completely covered in that beautiful color, a brilliant idea came to mind. I had finally figured out how to make her a part of my paintings. It was then that I decided to take her somewhere nice, somewhere we could be alone, somewhere I could paint my final masterpiece, undisturbed, just me and her. At last. I took her to the park where I first laid eyes on her. I sat her up against a tree by the lake and cut open her other arm. And that's when I bent down to dip my fingers in the warm, sticky substance that was spread on the ground. I glanced at the canvas, and then at the woman posing for me. She was absolutely gorgeous. I studied the curves of her body, the small details most people would miss when they looked at her. My fingers glided over the canvas, leaving a trail of flawless red paint that matched the waves of the woman's hair. She laid there exposed as I copied her flawless image onto the canvas. When I was finally finished, I took a step back to take in all its beauty. The color was just so perfect. I turned to show her how beautiful she was, but all I got back in response was a blank stare. And at that point, I realized she had changed. Her face, turned an ugly pale color, was now nothing compared to the color I added to my painting. And I also realized that her body was no longer of any use to me. I drained her dry by the time I completed my masterpiece. So I disposed of her body in the river and retreated to my apartment to rest. As I laid there in my bed, I studied the paintings of her I'd hanged on my walls. They were all so beautiful once, but now they are almost meaningless compared to my newest work of art. I held the masterpiece in my hands and studied it for hours. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to take my eyes off the mesmerizing image. But the longer I stared at its beauty, I couldn't help but think to myself, what am I supposed to do now that I've run out of this beautiful, perfect red substitute for paint? And then I heard a little voice in my head say to me, I bet her redhead little sister is filled with that same flawless color you so crave to find. Why don't you go meet her at the bus stop tomorrow? And that's exactly what I did.